EU webinar. My name is Amy Paley. I'm the North American Marketing Manager for Intertext Softlines and Hardlines Business Lines. Before we begin, I would like to go over some brief housekeeping items to ensure you get the most out of the webinar. Please keep in mind that due to the high number of attendees, all callers aside from the presenter have their lines automatically muted. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the question pane on your control panel. We do have a lot of content today, so we'll try to get to questions at the end, but if we aren't able to address your question during the webinar, we will be sure to have someone reach out with an answer for you. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a PDF of the slides presented and the link to the webinar recording will be emailed to each attendee after the webinar. During today's webinar, our expert will discuss regulatory compliance and quality and performance testing for footwear. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Pankaj Sarda is a director for Global Softlines Business Line at Intertext. He has nearly 17 years of experience in the apparel and accessory industry and specializes in areas such as product testing and total quality management. Pankaj has comprehensive technical knowledge and product manufacturing experience on several aspects of apparel and accessory manufacturing processes. He is a member of technical standards organizations such as ASTM and AATCC, and has presented on technical, regulatory, and compliance-related topics to various global retail customers. Pankaj holds a master's degree in material science from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. He earned his bachelor's degree in textile chemistry and a diploma in textile technology from the Textile Institute in India. Just a quick reminder, if anybody joined late, this webinar is being recorded. You'll receive an email with a link to both the recording and a PDF of the slides that are presented today. And now I'd like to pass it over to Pankaj to start.
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. So in next 15 minutes, I will try to go over footwear compliance aspect related to mainly 3 market regions: US, Canada, and EU. So there are 4 critical components of footwear compliance as listed here, and those are labeling, safety, chemical, and performance and claims. I will dive deeper into these compliance requirements individually for each market. So starting with for US labeling compliance requirement. So we'll talk about country of origin, the leather labeling requirements, tracking label in detail. So starting with country of origin marking. All footwear products that are imported in the United States, those must be marked with country of origin, and it should be permanently marked. FTC has recently proposed Made in USA labeling requirement just to prohibit unfair and deceptive acts of practices. Similarly, California has Made in USA requirement. And the requirement is like that, if 95% of them or more, if materials are made in USA, then the product can be called out Made in USA label. So the key aspect is significant parts of the footwear must be sourced and from the US. Footwear which looks like made from leather material, but they are actually synthetic or faux leather. Such products must call out wording like faux leather or imitation leather on their labels. Bonded leather is considered as imitation leather. So if anyone using bonded leather on upper, then it can't be labeled as genuine leather. Now for footwear which uses any percentage of wool, mainly 5% or above in upper or sock or lining, then such products must disclose the textile fiber content. Otherwise, there is no requirement to disclose, or there is no mandatory requirement to disclose textile upper fiber content, but if wool is there more than 5%, then it must be disclosed. Footwear that contains a real fur, then there is a requirement to disclose information about the real fur, such as name of the animal, country of origin, RN number, etc. Now, there are certain fur which are made from endangered species. Those are restricted. Those can't be used, including skin or any other like fur. And then the complete list of those endangered species can be found on the government website, which is related to the Endangered Species Act. Additionally to federal restriction for endangered species for uses in consumer products, there is U.S. state and cities ban for fur products. That is mainly California has the law has been into effect, and that the effective date for that law is January 1st, 2023. There are certain cities in California that has already prohibited use of fur products, such as city of San Francisco, Los Angeles, West Hollywood, and Berkeley. Certain states require that if footwear products use FAUX fur, then it must be disclosed onto the label. It can be on the hang tag, but if the fur is a faux fur, then it should be called out on the hang tag. Now, the Uniform Packaging and Labeling Regulation require to provide information such as product identity, quantity of content on the package, as well as information on the packaging that goes onto the footwear, either on the shoe box or any other form of the packaging that is used for footwear. For children's product at federal level, CPSC Act required to have tracking label to track the products in the event of recall. So that tracking label would go on the product as well as on the packaging. The information that is required is name of the manufacturer or the private labeler or the importer name, the location and the date of the production of the product, the information related to the manufacturing such as batch number, and any other information that is related to that specific source of the product that would go onto the tracking label. Now, when you import children's products into the United States, the children's products and the importer required to submit a certificate called a Children's Product Certificate, CPC, which will be issued based on third-party testing for all the applicable product safety standards that are listed on this slide. For environmental related claims such as disclosing recycled material content, materials claimed to be made from renewable materials, all such claims should be substantiated with relevant documentation before the claims goes onto the product. Now, for antibacterial or the antimicrobial related claims, there is, if any active pesticidal chemicals is present on the product, then the requirement is the pesticides used onto those footwear products must be registered with the EPA. Additionally, the marketing tag, if you call out antimicrobial, then it should clarify that antimicrobial chemical is used to protect the product against odors or deterioration of the materials, and not protect the actually user who is using the product. Now, in past, FTC has fined companies for misrepresenting claims, and those claims are mainly made in the USA and certain health-related claims. So if anyone try to use those claims, the requirement is those claims should be substantiated, without which there would be a significant fine if those claims are misrepresented. Now let's dive into footwear safety compliance requirement for the US market. So the first one is choking hazard, or also called as small part hazard. If footwear has small components, size smaller than 1.25 inch, which can fit into the cylinder, which is also referred as small part cylinder, then such components must withstand, at least 15-pound force of the pull force. And there is also torque force requirement, which is listed on this, which goes based on the age of the footwear products that is used. And the torque test force would vary from 2 to 4 pound force. Now, it is recommended that for children's footwear with decorative functional attachment that are smaller than 1.25 inch must undergo the pull test to confirm the detachment force required if it is more than 15 pounds. If it is, if the footwears are for a baby product, generally we recommend that decorative items which are not graspable, then those must be checked for the durability. And oftentimes we recommend to perform a specific test, or if those cannot be graspable, then we generally recommend it not to use those kind of glued or adhesive based decoration on footwear that are intended for age 3 and under. Footwear which are intended for children's age 8 and under also must not have any trims or metal attachments which pose sharp points or the sharp edges. Uh, Certainly, the poor slip resistance of footwear with the poor outsole, which doesn't have proper slip resistance, inferior quality of the heel attachment type are the two common reasons for fall hazard. So it is recommended that footwear outsoles must meet at least minimum of 0.4 dry stage coefficient of friction, and then 0.3 weight coefficient of friction. And then for heel, we generally recommend at least 150-pound force of the detachment force. So these are the most common type of the footwear recalls for the US market, which involve choking hazard, fall hazard, laceration hazard, restricted chemical related recall, and then toe and cap compression related recall, which generally involves PPE products. Now, this slide talks about, the highest number of recalls related to footwear are mainly choking hazard and then fall hazard, followed by laceration, and then chemical, and then impact related recall. Now, these are the examples of footwear recall related to choking hazard. In the first example, the metal clasps on the zipper came off, whereas in the second example, the decorative wheel came off. That posed choking hazard. On this slide, the left side example of the sandal is where the butterfly decoration came off, are detached, and on the other example, the molded rubber pieces that you see on the highlighted in circle, those came off easily, posing choking hazard. Now here, the rivet on the sandal ankle strap came off, and then under another example, the horn on the shoe toe area that came off easily, posing choking hazard. Now these are some of the example of the laceration hazard. The metallic thread on the sandal actually poked through the shoe lining and caused the laceration hazard to the user, whereas on the shoe rivets had sharp edges that actually caused the recall. Here the example is shows that the stars on the heel area pose the laceration hazard, whereas on the sandal, the metal tacks detached and caused the laceration hazard. Now these are some of the example of the fall hazard. On the shoe example, the polymeric outsole really didn't have much traction, causing children to fall on the wet and the smooth spur surfaces, whereas at the cork outsole on the sandal was able to detach easily and cause trip and fall hazard. These are some unique recalls where the product were claimed to be protecting a user from the snake bite, where it did not and caused the recall. These are related, this is a popular rubber clog related recall that the rubber clog got caught in the elevator. And here it shows that the imprints on the sole looks like swastika, and that caused the recall for this style. So moving into toxic chemical requirement for the US requirement. So at federal level, There is a requirement for lead in surface coating, which is 90 ppm, and then lead in substrate requirement, which is 100 ppm. CPSC additionally provide the material that can be exempted, and those are mainly natural materials such as dyed textile, genuine leather. Those are exempt from the lead in substrate testing. Additionally, at federal level, EPA has issued SNUR. They have issued two SNUR. The first one is for benzene-based dyes. So anyone who use benzene-based dyes, they require to get a prior approval before using those dyes in consumer products from the EPA. And this is very recent, where EPA has issued SNUR for which restricted certain PFAS chemicals in surface coating. So, and these chemicals are used in footwear, which are claimed to be water repellent or the waterproof claims. So if anyone wants to use these chemicals, there is a requirement from the EPA that they need to get a prior approval from the EPA before using those chemicals. Now, at the state level, as you may be already aware about California Prop 65, which maintain a list, and there is over 950 chemicals on that list. In past, footwear were mainly targeted for lead, phthalates, and very recently, the leather footwear were targeted for chromium-6. On the right-hand slide on the table, you see these are the most strictest limits that has been established for lead and phthalates based on the past settlements. For chromium-6, the limit has not been established yet, but we recommend to follow European chromium-6 requirement, which is most strictest requirement globally, until the settlement limit is established for the chromium-6. Now, these are the chemicals in last 6-7 years that were added. I have highlighted some of those which may be critical for the footwear products. So I would focus mainly on these three chemicals that were recently added. Out of these, first one is the dimethyl formamide, which is generally used in the PU based materials as a solvent, and then PFOS and PFOA. Those can be found in, as I mentioned previously, for footwear with any water repellent or the waterproof coatings or the treatment. Additionally, shoe polish or wax, they may contain these chemicals. The another state is Washington State, specifically for children's products or the children's footwear. The requirement is lead less than 90 ppm, cadmium is less than 40 ppm, and then phthalates, 6 phthalates less than 1000 ppm individually or in sum. So there are several states which requires reporting of certain toxic chemicals if used in children's products, and that includes footwear. And those states are Washington, Oregon, Vermont, and Maine. I won't go much into detail, but I just want to show this slide which compares the reporting requirements by these 4 states. New York is also recently enacted the act, but we don't have much information about their list. And it's still not effective. So right now we would focus on these 4 states. The total maximum number of chemicals combining all these 4 states are 86 chemicals. If anyone are using chemicals intentionally, there is individual limit, or if those chemicals are present as a contaminant, the requirement is 100 ppm. Some states require annual reporting, and some states require biennial reporting, depending upon the state you are selling into. So this is just a summary of the reporting requirement for those states. And these are the chemicals which I want to highlight from that 86 chemical list, which could be found commonly in the footwear. And if you don't want to monitor all those 86 chemicals, these are just an example of chemicals by the material type that could be present in those footwear components. At county level, in the New York, the 2 county, Albany County and the Suffolk County, those mainly restrict heavy metals in children's products. Albany County, in addition to checking for the chemicals, you would require to submit an annual certificate of compliance to the county for the styles you are selling into those respective county. Now, other than the product, at the packaging level, there is a Toxics in Packaging Clearinghouse regulation that has been adopted by 19 US states. And those US states require you to check packaging for mainly four heavy metals: lead, cadmium, chromium-6, and mercury. The total of those four heavy metals should not be more than 100 ppm present in any of the packaging that you use for the consumer products, including footwear. Now, these are the examples of the CPSC footwear-related recalls. The first one is for benzidine. It was a voluntary recall. The second one is for lead. The logo on the lead, which was stamped inside the on the sock lining, contained excessive amount of lead. These are some just additional examples of the lead in surface coating. One is in the flip-flop. The decorative paint had excessive amount of lead, and then the other style also had excessive amount of lead. The last one was on outsole. Now this slide talks about general trend related to Prop 65 notices, specifically for footwear. In 2019, we saw 13 Prop 65 notices issued for phthalates, and then 4 were issued for chromium-6. 2020, 18 for phthalates, and then 3 for chromium-6 and 1 for lead. And in 2021, until August, we saw 13 notices were issued for phthalates in footwear, and then 1 for chromium-6 in footwear. Now, for reporting requirement, mainly Washington State, they would monitor and then test samples for 85 chemicals on their list. And then if any of those chemicals are present over 100 ppm, they will issue notice to the manufacturer, and then manufacturer would generally have 45 days from the receipt notice date to respond on why the chemical is present and what is the manufacturer control plan to control that chemical during the manufacturing of the children's product. So this was, mainly the requirements, compliance requirement for U.S. market. Let's go over the requirement for Canada market. Now in Canada, these are the government departments that regulate consumer products. Health Canada, Industry Canada, Competition Bureau, state government agencies like Government of Quebec. So those will have certain authority in regulating children's product, the consumer products, and we'll specifically talk about footwear in next few slides. So Canada do require footwear to be marked with country of origin, and the requirement is the country of origin must be in English and French. As per the Consumer Packaging and Labeling Act, footwear packaging must have product identity, the importer and manufacturer name, and then the principal address of the business that must go on the footwear product packaging. Now, we used to have stuffed article labeling requirement before, and then footwear were within the scope, mainly the footwear with the filling materials. However, Ontario and Manitoba, they recalled those regulations, and currently only Quebec has stuffed article labeling requirement, but footwears are exempt from that labeling requirement. In the Quebec province, the requirement would be any information that goes onto the product packaging or a hang tag. The information must also be provided in French. Regarding performance or the sustainability related claims made on the footwear, again, something similar like in US and Canada, also the information must be accurate and not misleading. These claims must be substantiated and verified and shall be present in a manner that it indicates if the claim is specifically for entire product or just for one of the component of the product. So that should be clarified onto the product. If upper is made from the recycled content, the tag must call out that only upper has recycled. It has been made from the recycled material. Canada do require to check flammability on textile components that are used for the footwear. The test method and the requirement is similar to what we have seen in US for the apparel. But then if you're using that, if you're selling any footwear with textile upper, then the requirement is to also verify flammability of those textile components. In Canada, footwear are exempted from the small part regulation. However, we have seen that Health Canada has recalled footwear products for small part choking hazard. So it is recommended that if you're selling product into Canada and if it contains, any component that is smaller than 1.25 inch, then the requirement is to make sure, those components are very durable and those withstand 15 pound of force for those, for the components. Now, fall hazard has been one of the highest recall reason for footwear. And again, as I mentioned previously, it is recommended to check for slip resistance as well as heel attachment. Those are the two major area that has caused the slip hazard. If you're selling into Canada, those properties must be monitored during production, as well as if you're manufacturing any new style or new construction, those should be looked at, before the production starts. This is the summary of the footwear recall related history in Health Canada. As I mentioned, fall hazard is the #1 recall for footwear, followed by choking hazard, then chemical, and then what footwear related, safety related recalls. Those are the 4 main categories that footwear has been recalled in Canada. Now, this is an example of the small part recall. The hook and loop fastener on this style was easily came off, and that caused the choking hazard. Now, on this shoe, the left-hand side, the upper of the booty was very flimsy and loose, which caused to get caught under pedal, and that actually caused wearer to fall. The sandal of the heel came off and leaned to the side because of the user weight, and that caused user to fall. And similar to like Canada, the outsole, similar to US, the outsole on the shoe, had poor weight surface slip resistance, and that caused fall hazard. On the right-hand sandal slide, the ornamental metal flower came off easily. That posed choking hazard on the children's product. So those were the safety-related, examples, recall examples. Let's go into, toxic chemical-related requirement in Canada, and those are mainly, at the federal level. Health Canada requires to monitor lead in surface coating, which is 90 ppm. That would apply for both children and adults. Footwears. Additionally, for children's products, age 14 and under. So in US, the children's product age criteria is 12 and under, whereas in Canada it's 14 and under. So for children's footwear intended for age 14 and under, the lead in surface coating as well as mercury in surface coating needs to be monitored. Now, this was very recent. Now, before it was mainly childcare articles, but now all children's products require to comply with the lead in substrate requirement, and the requirement is 90 ppm, whereas in US, the requirement is 100 ppm. Now, in addition to federal level, there is Canadian Environmental Protection Act. They have listed several chemicals on under this act. And mainly for footwear, I would like to highlight the chemicals that could be end up and could be present in the footwear component. The first one is short chain chlorinated paraffins, SCCP, used for leather and fur production, mainly for leather fat liquoring process. Can be found in adhesives, certain coatings. PFOS, as I mentioned, it is used for surface treatment to impart water repellency. So it needs to be monitored. These chemicals are prohibited, so no presence is allowed. Organotin, TBT, used for synthetic leather or PVC-based components, and TBT can be found in such materials. So that's, those are the main toxic chemical requirements. These are some of the examples for lead-related recalls. First one is metallic shoe charm contain lead. The second one, which the flip-flop print contain lead in excessive amount. So this is the the last section of the footwear labeling requirement that is for Europe market. So I will go into mainly for labeling requirement in within Europe, safety related requirements, and then chemical related requirements. So let's begin with labeling requirement for European market. Now, in Europe, for footwear, it must disclose the material information of main components, and those main components are upper, lining and sock, and then outsole. So the requirement is any material which covers at least 80% of the surface area or 80% of the volume for the outer sole, that must be disclosed on the material label. If there is no single material that accounts for 80% of the surface area and any two materials that can cover that 80% area, then both materials must be disclosed. The label, additionally, instead of use of words, you can use pictogram, and then the label, you don't need to label both the pair, both the pieces. Only one piece can be labeled. That has to be stitched down or it has to be permanent onto the one of the shoe. So this slide talks about the pictogram for the footwear main components. For upper, you can see there is an arrow on the upper side that that will indicate the consumer that this material disclosure is for upper, lining and sock, which is inside material, and then outer sole, which is outside area for outsole that needs to be disclosed, and those would be the pictogram that will be followed. Now on this slide, it talks about the material related pictograms. For the first one is for leather. The second one is for coated leather. So the definition of coated leather is any surface coating that is applied onto the leather in excess of 0.15 mm is considered as coated leather. And that is the pictogram for coated leather. For textile material, it's basically woven fabric structure, and the picture is showing that the material is made of textile material. For all other materials, rubber, PU, EVA, a diamond shape would be used as a pictogram to disclose the information. So this is an example of the footwear material label for Europe. Like here you can see the upper is made up of leather, the lining and sock is made up of textile material, and then outer sole is made up of other materials. Now, there is a requirement of information that is provided. Some of the countries may accept English within the Europe. So there are 27 member states in the European Union. and each country may not accept the English language. So this slide talks about the accepted language, that the information provided onto the label or hang tag or the packaging box should also be provided in that language that is accepted in those countries. Now, country of origin is not mandatory in Europe for footwear. The European EU Commission is still working with to coming up with the regulation for mandatory origin labeling requirement. But there are certain member states, those are requiring voluntarily to call out country of origin, and those are listed on this table. So if you are selling in these countries, it is better to provide that information. But if you're selling, all multiple markets, anyhow, the product would call out country of origin. So you don't have to worry about calling it out separately. Now, like US, Europe has also restricted, fur made from endangered species. There is a link provided where you can find the detailed list of endangered species whose fur or any material cannot be used into the consumer products. Additionally, UK, Australia, Austria, Netherlands, Croatia, etc. They have banned fur farming, so you cannot source fur from those farms. Netherlands has banned mink, FAUX, chinchilla fur production. Now, for antimicrobial chemicals that are or any footwear treated with antibacterial chemicals, there is a biocidal product regulation requirement. The EU has a little stricter requirement than US. Like in US, the requirement is the EPA, the chemical must be registered with EPA. Similarly, in Europe, the antimicrobial chemical must be registered in Europe before it is used in the consumer products. However, additionally, in Europe, a statement must be provided onto the hang tag that mention that the product is treated with biocides. In US, there is no requirement to disclose the active substance of the of antimicrobial chemical, but in Europe, the requirement is the active substance must be disclosed. And then any relevant information related to the use of the products or related to precaution that is required in using the biocide treated product, that must also be disclosed, which most likely won't apply for footwear. The requirement is the label must be clearly visible, must be durable, and it also must be provided in a language that is acceptable by the member states. Now, going into REACH requirements. So these are the toxic chemical requirement for Europe. Europe has a regulation commonly referred as REACH regulation, which is a short form for registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. There are mainly three lists under this regulation. One is restriction list, often referred as Annex 17. The second one is authorization list, Annex 14, and then substance of very high concern list called as SVHC list. The chemicals on the restriction list, those are the chemicals which cannot be used into the product. There is a limit, and then the scope of that chemical that is restricted is provided under that restriction list. For example, chromium-6, azo-dyes, nickel, etc. The authorization list, the chemicals on this list is basically require a prior authorization to use in articles. There are 54 substances listed on this list. And then substance of very high concern, you can still, there are 219 substances on this list. You can still use the chemicals on this list. However, there is a requirement of communication and notification if If that chemical is present over 1000 ppm and then in specific quantity, which is generally 1 ton, if you are importing articles combined for that chemical over 1000 ppm and then over 1 ton, then there is a requirement of communication that you need to communicate that to the end user as well as to the distributor. And the list keeps on just adding something similar to Prop 65. The list gets added, but there is no bounty hunter that would come after you. You will have to just monitor when the SVHC chemical moves into either restriction list or authorization list. So that is only monitoring is needed. Other than that, if you can limit that chemical within 1000 ppm, then you can still use that chemical and you don't have any obligation for communication or notification. So these are the main chemicals that I think more related to footwear that are present in Annex 17. As I said, azo dyes, these dyes are used for leather and textile materials. There has been several recalls related to azo dyes that you can find on the REPEX website. So this is a website where you will find all the European recall related to consumer products. And the second one is the chromium 6. This is the topmost, I would say, reason for the recall in Europe, and which is mainly related to leather. Oftentimes, I have seen suppliers having difficulties in controlling chromium 6 if if the tanning is based on chromium, because the chromium is not stable and it gets reduced and oxidized to chromium 6 from chromium 3. So oftentimes during transportation, even though you have a passing report, you might see chromium 6 developed during the transportation, which makes it 3 ppm requirement. And obviously we recommend that following aging test, perform aging on the leather before the chromium 6 test is performed, so that you will get highest amount of chromium 6 that can be converted and that can be found into that product. The other one is we mentioned organotin. We mentioned that Canada restrict organotin TBT. In Europe, there are 4 organotins that are restricted, and the requirement is 1000 ppm each. Nickel, any metal components that goes onto the product, if they are in direct skin contact, then there is a requirement for nickel, which is 0.5 microgram per centimeter square per week. This is a release requirement, so amount of nickel that can be released from that component. Oftentimes, the supplier would generally require to test for nickel spot test. That is basically a spot test that to confirm that whether nickel present onto those items or not. The requirement for lead in Europe is a little lenient compared to US and Canada, which is 500 ppm. Cadmium requirement is 100 ppm. Whereas obviously this requirement is for both adult and children's product. Phthalates, we generally recommend to monitor 17 phthalates. That includes chemicals on phthalates on the SVHC list. Dimethyl fumarate, this is a mold agent, antifungal agent that is used for the leather materials. Mainly, you will find this chemical during the rainy season. Most likely the leather would be treated with chemical containing dimethyl fumarate. And then footwear that flip-flops or outsole made up of rubbery material, they generally contain PAH. And the requirement is to check for 8 pH. Each should not be exceeding more than 1 milligram per kg and total 10 milligram per kg. Now this is maybe new for some of you guys. This is entry 72, often referred as CMR substances. So REACH has added entry 72, highlighting 33 chemicals that are restricted in clothing, textile, and then footwear product, which came into effect in November 1st, 2020. There are many chemicals on the list, some like phthalates, formaldehyde, solvents, carcinogenic dyes. Again, I have not seen any enforcement yet. Again, this has went into effect last year in November. So I have not seen I have not seen any recall related to these chemicals in footwear products, but this is just a reference for you guys that this is a new requirement, and some of those chemicals may be present, like solvents, dimethyl formamide, which I mentioned under California Prop 65. A formaldehyde requirement is there, 75 ppm. Before, there was no requirement for formaldehyde at European Union level, but now any upper made from textile should not contain formaldehyde more than 75 ppm. So I would like, maybe adhesive you are using, just check for formaldehyde. If it doesn't contain excessive amount of formaldehyde. And pH, we are already monitoring that under REACH restriction. That's not a new requirement. There is an extractable heavy metal requirement, which is new, and that is mainly checking for lead, cadmium, arsenic, and chromium. So, as I mentioned about REACH SVHC list, again, you don't have to worry about reporting or a communication obligation, as long as you know that those chemicals are not exceeding 1000 ppm. At a laboratory level, if you are sourcing any new material, we can screen for all those 216 17 chemicals on the material, and then can identify if any of the chemical on that list is present, and if it is present, if it exceeds 1000 ppm, that information can definitely be provided to you guys if you need Intertech to screen for those materials. But other than that, there is I have not seen any concern as far as EU SVHC list or the enforcement from the EU member states. Now, EU also has a separate regulation called persistent organic pollutants, also referred as POPs. Now, these are the chemicals which are hazardous to environment. They generally don't get decomposed easily. And very recently, PFOA was added to the list. So it was there under EU REACH restriction, but now it got moved to under POP regulation. So the requirement for SCCP, short chain chlorinated paraffins, is 0.15% or 1500 ppm. Again, you should monitor leather, synthetic leather for the presence of this chemical. PFOS and PFOA, again, these are uppers treated with water repellent based chemicals. Mainly those are fluorinated based chemicals. Now, in addition to European Union, some of the EU member states, they require reporting or they require, monitoring for certain chemicals. The first one is pentachlorophenol. This is again fungicide, or it mainly used in leather products and some natural textile materials to avoid formation of mold. And then the countries that monitor this, Netherlands, Germany, Norway, they would monitor this chemical in leather products. Formaldehyde, now with the entry 72, before there was a requirement at the member level. But if you are importing, textile-based footwear for baby item, then some of those member state has a stricter requirement of 16 ppm. If you're selling products in Germany, there has been very I would say more enforcement related to allergenic dispersed dyes for footwear products. There are certain magazines who go out in the market. They would pull out the products and check for some of those chemicals, including allergenic dispersed dyes. So if if your products are landing into Germany, most likely they would be checked for dispersed dyes. So if you're using synthetic materials, synthetic textile materials, they should be checked for dispersed dyes. There are total 8 dispersed dyes that has been restricted or maybe monitored by the inspectors at the port in Germany. Now, this is just an overall summary for footwear recall. As you can see, the highest number of recall related to footwear in Europe is chemical. We have seen that there are so many chemicals that could end up into the footwear, but majoritarily I have seen chromium 6, SCCP. Those are the two main chemicals I see that that could end up into the footwear products and can trigger the recall. The second one is choking hazard related recall. Almost 20% of those recalls, footwear recalls, are related to choking. Then work footwear related recalls, and then the fall hazard related recall, which are the least one. So as I mentioned, chromium 6, if you are sourcing a leather-based item, obviously you would be checking for chromium 6. If you're not performing aging test, I would highly recommend to perform aging test to make sure any chromium that is present in the leather items, that gets converted to chromium 6, and then the test is performed to detect the chromium 6. That way, even the product undergoes shipping time and the humidity and temperature exposure, there won't be any surprises for you guys when the product ends up at the port, and maybe the authority or the inspection authority at the local member states, they probably would hold up the shipment for excessive chromium 6. So that would be, our recommendation. Dimethyl fumarate, as I mentioned, this could be found in some of those natural materials, and that needs to be monitored. These are also used as a kind of a silicone sachets, to absorb moisture, but I don't see, these chemicals are anymore used. But in case you are sourcing these packaging sachets to absorb moisture, just make sure those are not they don't contain dimethyl fumarate. The chrysin, the outsole or the sole made up of the black polymer, it contains chrysin. That is one of the PAH, and that triggers the recall. Again, this is for SCCP. The upper is made up of synthetic material, and it exceeded the limit of 0.15%, which is, the result came up of 4,500 ppm for this flip-flop. And then the PCP, which is used as anti-mold agent, those were detected in those footwear exceeding 0.05 ppm requirement. Now, this is an example of footwear with fall hazard, where the outsole pose the unusual risk of slipping against slip resistance, and then the product was recalled. The sandal here with the pearls, obviously it is pretty obvious that the beads seems like pretty loose, and they came off and detached easily. So the reason for recall was bead coming off easily, posing choking hazard. And here, again, this is related to choking hazard. The small rhinestone and the flowers came off easily, and they were detached and caused the choking hazard. Now, this is my last slide. I just want to highlight, if your products are ending up into any of these member states into the Europe, These are the member states which really, do a lot of inspection at the port, and they have highest number of footwear recalls. Germany, Spain, Hungary, Bulgaria, and France. So if your products, footwear products, are landing into those in these member states, you have to have monitored some of those chemicals which have been targeted by the inspector in those member states. So I just wanted to share the list of the countries. So if you can check on that, and maybe closely monitor the product that end up into those member states. And this is this was my last slide. So if you have any question, I can answer that. If not, we will answer those later. Amy, back to you.
Thanks, Pankaj. We have a couple minutes left, and we have just a few questions that I think we can get through. Going back to the U.S. safety, are sharp points, edges, choking hazards, small part hazards, are those only required for children's footwear but not for adult footwear?
Yes.
Okay. Are short chain chlorinated paraffins in footwear regulated by Health Canada?
Not by Health Canada, but it is listed under Canadian EPA SEPA. I have not seen any activities related to enforcement, but the regulation talks about that chemicals like SCCP, organotin should not be present into the consumer products. But with the limited resources at the Canadian EPA, I have not seen any recent enforcement activity related to SCCP.
Okay, and then for the EU footwear labeling directive, if the lining and the sock are made of two different materials, how would that be handled on the label?
So if lining and sock, as far as the component, you will use the same pictogram, but you will highlight for if it is made up of textile, the textile, and then if it is made up of, let's see, leather. So you will have both textile and the leather pictogram for lining and sock.
Okay, and then is a slipper that has a sole on it similar to a shoe, is this considered footwear, and would it require like slip testing, or would it fall under hosiery in the US and Canada?
Yeah, so if it is, if I understand correctly, so if the garment has a polymeric outsole, then yes. So I would recommend that if those garments are for toddler, then perform the slip resistance testing on those.
Okay. Is there a website link to the EU pictograms for reference?
Yeah, I can definitely share that later with the attendee who asked the question.
Okay. Just give it another minute and see if any other questions come in. Again, as a quick reminder to all who attended, we did record this webinar, and you will receive an email with a link to both the recording and the slides presented during today's webinar. You'll receive that via email. And it does not look like any other questions are coming in. So I'd like to thank Pankaj for his time and expertise, and thank you to everybody for attending our webinar today. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.